Hello, this is Matt Stevens from The Fierce and the Dead, and you're listening to Progzilla Radio.
Welcome to episode number 3 of the Tabletop Genesis podcast. I am Mike Lord, and we are here discussing the album Genesis, also known as Mama, also known as Shapes. So what do you call it? Let us know. Today, we have our regular crew now, again commenting on this album. So let's introduce ourselves.
Hi, my name's Simon. Goodbye.
Hi, my name is Elisa. Nice to meet you all.
Tom Roche back again.
And it's Stacey Godfrey. Hello.
We're talking about the album Genesis, released in 1983. It is the first self-titled album in Genesis's career. And Mr. Simon, would you like to read our trusty Wikipedia entry?
Yeah, certainly. Genesis is the 12th studio album from the English rock band Genesis, released in October of 1983 on Charisma Records. The band decided on its title as each of the album's 9 tracks were written as a group. The album cover depicts the shapes from a Shape-O children's toy made by Tupperware. Mike Rutherford referred to this album as his favourite Genesis album. Genesis was a commercial success upon its release. The album reached number 1 in the UK and number 9 in the US, where it sold over 4 million copies. 5 singles were released between 1983 and 1984, with Mama being the band's highest charting single in the UK at number 4. In 2007, Genesis was reissued with a new stereo and 5.1 surround mix as part of the band's box set.
Yes, this was, I think, for kids of my age in the US, and probably a little bit younger, the Mama Tour video in probably 85 or so was played to death on MTV. I watched it every time it came on, and probably videotaped it also off the TV. And it was one of those things that I would just obsessively kind of watch and rewatch to really kind of get into the intricacies of this band. I think Stacey had a similar experience.
Yeah, actually the Mama Tour video was my first encounter with Genesis, although at the time I didn't really know it was Genesis. So when...
How old were you then?
I was probably 7. Yeah, I was 7 years old. So what happened, 7 or 8 at this point, probably 8. It was so long ago, I can't really remember. But
3 years. I mean,
yeah, I know, it just flies. So I got into No Jacket Required, one of Phil's solo albums, when it came out. And I just fell in love with it. I loved it. I made my mom and dad play it all the time. And I just fell in love with Phil Collins. And around this time, a video store opened up in our neighborhood, and on the Friday nights, my mom would take my sister Sue and myself to the video store, and we could pick one VHS cassette each to watch, just to keep us quiet, I guess, for the evening. And my sister would go and pick out some Care Bears nonsense or Disney video. And I remember walking through one time, and I saw the Mama Tour cassette, and I saw Phil Collins on the cover, and I was like, oh, there's Phil Collins, I know him, and I would rent it. Fell in love with it. That was my regular rent every Friday for quite a while. I remember. I should ask my mom, actually. She has a memory of this. I was 7.
That's pretty precocious watching, isn't it?
I was obsessed with music. I remember when I was very young, like younger than even that, when my mom wanted some alone time or she had to do something, she would just sit me in the living room with the radio on, and I would just sit there and listen. So she could go in the kitchen, she could go take a shower, she could and so the radio was my babysitter. And I remember hearing That's All, and I used to call it the black and white song. And I remember asking my mom once, and I didn't understand how radio worked. I was just asking. I was like, "Mom, can you make them play the black and white song for me?" Again, not knowing it was Genesis. I just heard Phil Collins. I thought it was a Phil Collins song. I thought, it was Phil, and so you imagine my surprise years later getting this album after I got Invisible Touch for my 9th birthday present. And hearing I saw, looking at the tracks. I could read at this point, so very proud of myself. I was reading through the tracks. I'm like, okay, I didn't recognize them. But when That's All started, I was like, the black and white song. It was amazing. So, yeah, Genesis, has always been a part of my life, whether I knew it or not, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was for me, seeing, the That's All in the Mama videos on MTV a lot. That was probably my first real awareness. Really, the That's All video of, there's this band called Genesis, and it's separate from Phil Collins.
Right.
Because I think Phil was well-known enough there within the Air Tonight and maybe a couple other things that, I kind of became aware of both of them at the same time when I was, 12, 13, that age.
Yeah, me too. Growing up in Argentina, again, all the music video, shows on TV, they would show, Mama Tour, parts, songs like, and so and then I would rent the videos, the VHS as well. Not every Friday though, but quite often.
You were just dedicated.
I go to my auntie's place that they have a video. Yeah. So I would rent that, and Three Sides Live too. And I loved it. Again, I fell in love with Phil Collins, and so it was lovely. I was like, I need to get this cassette.
Well, we grew up in the sticks, our family, so we didn't have MTV like every other house had in the
I didn't
country.
either, so I was much older.
For some reason, we didn't have cable at all, so everyone was talking about MTV and on new videos, and it went right over our heads. But I do remember, I think That's All was probably the first Genesis song I have memory of hearing and being aware of.
Sure.
And it was just part of the radio at the time.
Right.
I didn't think anything of it. I liked the song. I probably recorded it off the radio with a whole bunch of other stuff. Total Eclipse of the Heart, whatever was around that time. And so then, once I got into Invisible Touch and went there, it was the first album I went back after Invisible Touch and got. And, I should still have the cassette from Columbia House Records and Tapes.
Where you could just rattle it. So.
There it is.
It's a beautiful sight.
Where you would pay, it was a thing in America where you could pay $13 and get one album, and then you could get like 10 more for a penny each.
Yeah.
So I got this, and then from there I was hooked. Started exploring their catalog backward.
Yeah, so it seems like for those around this table, this was the album or the time that really, hooked people in different ways. So close to this. If it was maybe Invisible Touch for Stacy, I think might have been the first Genesis one, but this was pretty close on there.
Yeah.
It was the one that you realized there was more to the iceberg than just was above the surface.
Right, right, because there was a deeper level there. So with that, shall we go into Mama?
No.
Let's go to Papa.
So let's talk about Mama.
Touch and to feel you, Mama. Oh, I just can't keep away. In the heat and the steam of the city, eyes got me running and I just can't break. So say you help me, Mama, 'cause it's getting so hard.
Oh, this is.
I think what happened, I think for people who started with Invisible Touch, like Stacy and I, and anyone here who, like, you heard the radio hits and that was great, and you bought the album, you liked it. You said, okay, let me go back one, see what they did.
Right.
And you put this on, and those first few beats of Mama, when it's got that boom, boom, you're like, this is different than anything that I hear on the radio today.
Right.
I want to hear more. And so you keep listening to it, and then by the atmosphere, with that drum beat, and all of a sudden it's got that crescendo of a keyboard chord, which gets louder and louder, and then finally, doo-doo, Tony coming in, it was like nothing you've heard before. So that really sunk its teeth into me.
My feeling about it is that this track is probably one of the darkest things that they'd ever recorded. Sure. I mean, I'm trying to track back to see. We're probably talking, something off maybe a Watcher of the Skies, or even sort of like something off the Lamb for sort of like menace.
Right. Yeah. It's a scary song.
We're all scared
right now.
Yes. We're all a little hesitant to talk about this song.
No, it's violent. I mean, I remember getting some chills, and Phil is just singing his heart out, and I'm like, oh, Mama, it's getting serious. Phil is screaming at you.
I think we were getting into the age of the screamy Phil.
Yeah.
Up until this point, I think Phil had largely, I won't say treading in the footsteps of Gabriel, but he was, at this point, he'd had, was it 2 solo albums out at this point?
Yeah.
And he was finding his way as a solo artist. And I think one of the things that Phil brought to the band in the 80s was that voice, was that moment of that scream. That I won't say it's a primal scream, but he could really hit that. And unfortunately, it did for his vocals by the end of the decade. Right. But I think it's a chilling moment, especially when he hits the sort of, I mean, sorry, this is going to sound very nerdy musical thing, but he hits the major chord with his voice to complete the chord, to give it that sort of, you feel the change when he goes, oh,
sure,
and that's an amazing moment for me, and I don't think really Genesis ever recorded anything quite like it before or since.
Sure, yeah, it's a very unique song, and Genesis had this talent, and I think Phil, especially in his solo career, of knowing how to use these drum machines.
Yeah.
Of that were fairly common at the time, but they really used them as unique musical instruments themselves. I mean, things we taught in Abacab previously, this album specifically with the Mama riff, Mama drum beat, which is really something Mike Rutherford put into the drum machine. It wasn't something Phil did, but it was something that was an atmosphere that they were able to use that I can't think of any other major band that used it as either as much or as well.
I totally agree, yeah.
And they integrated it so well with the acoustic drums. Like one of my favorite parts of the song is when that transition from the drum machine to Phil actually drumming. Can't you feel my
because it
really
had been
works.
withheld for that long.
Yeah.
And when it finally comes in, you're like, oh, there it is.
Yes.
There's the drums.
Yeah, it's quite a long song for a single. I mean,
Right.
what was it, like 6 or 7 minutes?
Yeah,
so,
sure.
yeah.
Can I just make mention of something as well, which is this was one of the very first albums, and I read this a couple of days ago on, I think it was Wikipedia, which is this is the very first album which I think they totally collaborated on. With, I think Abacab, they still brought one solo track each.
At least one, yeah.
Yeah, this was all starting from scratch with nothing.
But this is the very first album that they had done, I think, since The Lamb, where there was no excess tracks.
Correct. There were no, like on the singles for this period, it's all either live tracks or even, I think, things from the past. But mainly, they didn't have any bonus songs on this album, which was fixed in spades for the coming albums after this. But for this one, because it was the first one where they were writing from scratch, I guess they felt that they did their album and said, okay, this is it.
I think that was part of the recording process too, is they got everything they wanted out and they said, okay, it's good, let's not mess with it anymore, let's not try to write extra stuff to put on, which is how they came up with Mama, because they said that they recorded it and set the final one pretty much early. They didn't spend a lot of time. They got the sound of it, and they said, okay, that's good. Instead of trying to like rework it and think about it next week later, like they record it, and what's on the album is pretty much one of the early takes that they did.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And that was the joy for them in interviews that they talked about of having their own studio where they didn't have the pressure of oh, we're on the clock, we've got to keep going, or we've got to finish this in a certain period of time. It was more just the kind of joy of being able to do everything in the moment. If you watch I think on the Mama reissue Mama Tour video DVD, there's kind of a making of this album. And the very first song they finished is actually, I'll jump ahead, is the last track on the album. It's Gonna Get Better. But then, Mama was probably pretty shortly after that they did it, and they were done with it. And there's a great works in progress version on the Archive 2 box.
Well, I wouldn't say great.
That's not great.
But I love those type of things, being able to see how things came out.
It was
How things
interesting,
came
for
about.
the first 5 seconds,
first-
one time.
One time.
All right,
But I never go back to that.
see,
Never play that part again.
See,
No.
see, that's the type of thing, again, I don't listen to it in place of the actual song, but if it comes up as random play when I'm playing things off of my computer, I certainly wouldn't fast forward through it, because it does. I'd love to have kind of the demo album for each of those, for Invisible Touch, and for, We Can't Dance, Calling All Stations, to kind of see kind of how these songs developed. I think that's great. I think that's neat. But I also know that's not for everybody.
At the last show, Mike was shouting, "Mama, work in progress. Play Mama, work in progress."
That's right. I just want to hear Phil mumble.
But it's a very unique sound, but in another sense, it's not a unique sound, because a few years earlier, Phil had done a song with atmosphere leading up 3/4 of the song. Then he comes in with the drums
In
in the air tonight.
Yes.
So the style seems very reminiscent, and I have my own theory, which is widely held by Tom Roche, is that the story is that Phil, with the Duke sessions, came to Mike and Tony with a bunch of songs, including In the Air Tonight.
Yes.
He swears he played it for Tony and Mike. Tony says he didn't play it for us.
And Mike can't remember.
And Mike can't remember.
Right.
So my feeling is that he might have played it for him, and Tony later, kicking himself for having rejected it for a Genesis song, said, okay, well, Phil had a hit with that. Let's do kind of a version of our own that follows that style, and we'll do a song that has atmosphere building up, and then the drums coming at the end, and that's where Mama came from. So that's my theory.
There you go.
It was Tony Banks on the grassy knoll with the drum beat.
That's right. Interesting. Well, hey, we have, that could be a theory, we'll never know. Next, we'll talk about That's All.
Just as I thought it was going alright, I found out I'm wrong when I thought I was right. It's always the same, it's just a shame, that's all. I could say day and you'd say night. Tell me it's black when I know that it's white. Always the same, it's just a shame, and that's all. I could leave, but I won't go, though my heart might tell me so. I can't feel a thing from my head down to my toes. But why does it all...
This is not one of my favorite songs on the album. I know it was the big hit in the U.S. for it, and
Was this a huge hit over here?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was. It was bigger than Mama. It was
Oh, wow,
the hit.
okay.
It was
Yeah.
the hit from this album in the U.S. It might have been top 10.
We couldn't
Right.
handle
think-
Mama over here.
Yeah, Mama's
Yeah,
too
Mama.
deep for us.
Yeah,
Too
it scared
intense.
too many people.
Six
so-
minute song about prostitute. We couldn't
Yeah.
do it.
or whatever it was about. Who knows? So, yeah, that's all. Like, I like the sound of it, but it just sounds a little too empty for me. Like, the piano doesn't sound enough like a piano to me. It sounds a little bit kind of stilted in some ways. Over time, it just hasn't worked for me.
Right. As what I was saying earlier, my whole black and white story, and how much I loved it when I was so young, and I think I've heard it so many times now. It's kind of dulled in my ears.
Right.
I have the same feeling about Salisbury Hill. Like, if I hear it on the radio or it shuffles on my iPod, these are two songs where I'm like, there's some other songs I could
heard this
spend
enough in my life.
Yeah, I could spend some time with that.
Right.
I haven't as this one. So yeah, I just think I've heard it so many times. Right, I was listening to it this past week to get ready for the show, and I was just like trying to find something new in it, which I usually can do in a Genesis song. I still continually find new things in their music. That's why I love it so much. But for this track, not so much. So I'm with you on this, Mike.
Well, I think in a way, I think it's, as a song, it's very well written. It's got lyrics you can sing along to, and it's got a beat they can sing
Right.
along to. It's got a very country / that piano, dun 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 dun. It almost sounds very like Native American dance, like the tribal kind of song. And one thing which I've noticed, and people call this, which I just kind of realized over the past week or so listening to this album, is that people call it the Genesis album or Shapes or the Mama album. I've nicknamed it now the Piano album.
Okay.
Because except for Mama and Home by the Sea, every other song features piano prominently or very significantly in a portion of that song. If you listen to every other song except for Mama, That's All, Illegal Alien, Taking It All Too Hard, Just a Job to Do, Silver Rainbow, and It's Gonna Get Better, all feature piano in a big way.
Well, interestingly enough,
I've stunned the crowd. I've stunned the
well
tabletop.
Oh, because I'm going through them trying to think about, okay.
And when you think, I listen to that
yes.
song, I don't see it. When you get to the part, oh yeah, there's a little bit of piano. Right
There's
Yeah.
an interesting thing about that piano sound as well, and I'm going to sound nerdy musician, but the piano in question is what's known as a Yamaha CP80. It's the very first,
I was going to say
what
that.
they were calling the touring piano, and it was the one that a lot of bands were using. I mean, Elton John used it, Joe Jackson used it, Howard Jones used it, and it's the thing that makes me smile about that is that it's the Genesis sound, and it goes across. Peter Gabriel was using it. You only have to listen to sort of like Red Rain, and you'll hear it there. Phil Collins he's a classic sort of CP80 user, and so as a result, I always associate that sound with Genesis and all of the various offshoots of Genesis, the solo projects as well.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's because they were writing the entire album together and jamming together to write, and so that's the instrument he was using to write with, and it just kind of stuck on the final album. He wasn't exploring, any other synth sounds or anything like that. But that's an interesting observation.
Well, thank you.
Thomas.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, for me again, I like the song. It's a simple song. It's almost like a perfect, the rhythm. It's nice, but it doesn't have a lot of substance, a lot of content.
I wonder why it was such a hit then.
Well, it was the United States of America. That's why. Not a lot of substance,
And it's
like our country western music.
Well, and it fit the pop. It fit the pop formula at the time.
Yeah. And I will say, I started off talking not terribly positively about the song. I still think it's a fine song.
Yeah.
I think we've all said. And I think also on its plus side, there's a cool little keyboard solo in the middle of it. That's, just, perfect for the song. Mm-hmm. And that's, when I was listening to it, trying to kind of think about this a bit more, I was like, yeah, that's a great little solo that Tony came up with for that. It's perfect for the song. Mm-hmm. It's an organ sound. It's not quite an organ sound. It's a little bit more interesting than just a Hammond or something like that. And I go, that works for me. And I think that I even heard a little bit of it in one of the first or second verse that I was like, oh, I never noticed that before. Mm-hmm. Still not enough to kind of push it over the top for me and to say, wow, I wish they played this in 2007. I have not missed hearing this song live.
How was it? I've never seen this song live.
I think it sounds kind of empty live. It's more of a studio thing. There's a guitar solo at the end of it that it's not one of Mike's finer moments on guitar, I don't think. It's not bad, but it just doesn't do anything for me. It peters out.
A lot of the songs from this I readily associate with the Mama Tour video.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I always, whenever I hear this song in my head, I'm just remembering Phil and Mike hopping feet from one foot to the other as Mike is doing the solo.
Yeah.
And he's trying to put him off by blowing on his hand.
Yeah.
as he's playing.
Right.
I was always surprised that it was never legitimately covered by a country group. Garth Brooks covered Shameless by Billy Joel and made it a big hit of his own. It's got such a country feel to it that I looked it up this past week to see somebody must have covered it as a country singer, as a hit, and I didn't find anything. I did see on YouTube, if you look up The Novelists, I've never heard of them, a group called The Novelists, and That's All. They do a pretty good country version of it, so maybe we'll put the link up on tabletopgenesis.com.
Yeah, we can push them over the edge now, so we'll get them the publicity they need.
I think that's all on That's All.
I think that is. So next up would be Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea.
Sea, turns are right. Picking up the pieces, putting them away. Something doesn't feel quite right. Help me, someone, let me out of here. Then out of the dark we suddenly heard, welcome to the home by the sea.
We'll discuss these as one piece because I think that, you know, except for on this album, I always think of them as one
Me too.
one piece of music.
I didn't know there were two songs. And
It's funny because I consider them two songs. Like
Really?
Home by the Sea,
Really?
Oh.
And then second Home by the Sea. And I love Genesis instrumentals in general.
Me too.
So, sometimes if I get the CD and I want to listen to one song, maybe I'll just go to second Home by the Sea.
Right,
because
right.
I like the instrumentals.
I think the first time I do remember hearing this song, when it went through the instrumental part, and at the end when they started singing Images of Sorrow, Pictures of Light, I'm like, wait, they sang that before. Is this the same song? Like, I was so
Yeah.
clueless that it would take all this time to play an instrumental part and then keep the song going.
Wait, they're reprising something?
I don't get it. This is frightening
This
and
is
confusing.
crazy. And I kind of like it.
I feel kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, again, you know, probably the centerpiece of the album, you know, if you
Yeah.
consider it one big song. When I've done some editing, audio editing of different bootleg things, I make them one song. I don't have Second Home by the Sea separate. So sorry, Allie. But
I forgive you.
yes, but we can certainly listen to those instrumentals because it's a great instrumental. It's a great lyric. On that Mama Making of Genesis video, there's actually a good section of Tony singing the lyrics to Phil, showing him kind of how to sing
okay.
it as like a guide vocal.
Oh, right.
And it's a great moment because it's Tony singing the words that he wrote.
Yeah.
And Phil's sitting there listening and, you know, kind of going, okay. And then when you kind of hear in Tony what Phil will be doing, which I
Right.
think is really cool.
As is often the way when we talk about albums, I revisit an album before we do the show
Right.
just to listen to it again. This time round, I just fell in love with this song.
Yeah.
And I would now rate this probably in my top 5, Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea. And for me, it's the melody. It's the that just hooked itself into my head,
Right.
and I just can't. And of course, it's got the classic moment of Phil Collins doing his Cockney photos in a frame moment as well.
Yes.
But it's also, again, it goes back to the live where he calls it a ghost story, and
Yeah.
he gets people to sort of like do the what do they call it?
He was trying to get in touch with the other world.
Yes, indeed.
It gets better.
I hope so. At the end of the album, it does. So.
And I like this period because it was the 80s. It was like early, mid-80s. You know, you got Cyndi Lauper coming out and you have Purple Rain and all this stuff. And people were like going for the MTV generation. The videos were just starting to get big. And yet they're still doing an 11-minute song about a haunted house.
Right.
And they didn't care. They're like, we're doing this. We like this. We're
Right.
we're writing this. Who cares?
Yep. My favorite lyric, probably on the album, is the third verse. Images of sorrow, pictures of delight, things that go to make up a life. I think it's one of those things that it really works for me. Again, you know,
It's elegant proof that for all of the nerdiness that we ascribe to Tony Banks, he can pull a good lyric out of his hat if he wants to.
He can. One of my friends, actually, a friend of mine who knows Genesis at a distance. When I was talking about this song with him at one point, he said, well, that was a Gabriel song. I said, no, that's from the Mama album in '83. And he was shocked. He thought it was a Gabriel era song.
Interesting.
Yeah, which I was kind of like, really? Again, knowing all this, I thought that was crazy. But then thinking about it, I thought, you know, I could see how people would think that. Again, Genesis from a distance, it's a type of song that harkened back, maybe not as much in the music, but maybe more in the lyrics, just to have that kind of older feel to it. Again, they're still in their early 30s at this point, so they're not that old. But it's, you know, in their career, it kind of does harken back to that first 5 years, the 71, 75 time frame.
I can see that. I can definitely see that. Certainly thematically and stylistically. It's also the beginning of Phil's extensive use of Simmons drums,
Yes.
as well, electronic drums. And I remember him talking about in an interview. He said there were things you can do with a Simmons drum which you can't do with a regular drum because of the playing surface.
Right.
And he was able to do these little rolls and these trills. But in doing so, he said it was the start of his. It damaged his wrists.
Right.
You know, these things were hard to play on.
Right.
And I'm not entirely sure exactly how much damage they call long term, but of course we all know that he had real problems later on. I'm not entirely sure if it was tendonitis or because of this, but he did mention that they were hard surfaces to play on.
Right. So with the instrumental being kind of your, think of it as a separate song, Ellie. What is it about this instrumental that grabs you?
The music.
That's handy.
In an instrumental, that helps usually. So
I don't know, it reminds me at some point of Los Endos, where there's instrumental and then Phil singing at the end.
I find these instrumentals very singable in some ways. The melody that Tony starts out playing, na 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 na. It's easy to kind of think that there could be words there,
right?
But the melody is taken by, in this case, the keyboard. It's a real song. It's not just wanking away on an instrumental on a guitar or something.
But, it's funny you say that because I always think of Second Home by the Sea as like their jam band song.
Sure.
Like it's kind of their. I mean, as much as Genesis could ever be a jam band, but I love it too.
That's how they wrote it.
Yeah, I mean, I love their instrumentals. I just love instrumental music in general. You can tell me. You can introduce me to a new prog band and go, they're completely instrumental. I will listen to them no matter what. But if they're not, I'm kind of like, all right, you got to tell me more before I put this in my CD player. But yeah, I love the whole song. But like Ellie, I'm a bigger fan of like the second Home by the Sea, definitely. I think it's got the big chords, the big walls of sound. I would love to hear a band like Particle cover this. I think that would be phenomenal. They're more of an instrumental jam band located on the West Coast, who I've seen before. It's great. It is, as we said, it's a centerpiece of the album. No matter how much they change, they still stay the same, and it's apparent in this song.
It's one of my probably top 10, if not top 5. And for as great as the song is, I know when they did it on the album, and for live that tour, and I think also for the Invisible Touch tour, he was using the electronic drums. Mm-hmm. And, he'd give it 9 or 10, in terms of how awesome it was. But once he switched for the We Can't Dance tour and the 2007 tour to the real drums for it, that I think kicked it up to 11.
Interesting.
I mean, I will take those versions over the electronic drums
I'll
any
have to have
day.
another listen to those.
And then they do this one thing right towards the end of the instrumental. They pause for a second and then come back in and slam him and Chester, and it's just this moment of silence, which is just awesome. I got to take a moment. It's so, but like just live, it's just fantastic. And some people say, well, they did it on the Genesis tour, they did it on Invisible Touch tour.
Some people say, I say it.
I think Mike, when I say they, I mean Mike Lord. They did it on the We Can't Dance tour, they did it on the 2007 tour. 4 tours in a row. They can probably retire that. I could probably be okay with them playing it every tour.
Yeah,
I think it says an awful lot about how they feel about the song as well, and the fact that it figured so prominently in all of those sets.
I agree that I am always happy to hear it when I hear it live, but I think had I not heard it in 2007, I don't know if I would have missed it. Mm-hmm. It probably depends upon what maybe would have been played in its space, because again, that's a big chunk of time to have another song or two in there. But I think that, for me, I'd seen it on the Invisible Touch tour, I'd seen it on We Can't Dance, I would have seen it on Calling All Stations, had that come over to the United States. I didn't need to see it in 2007.
I think everybody's entitled to their wrong opinions.
Fine. So let's move on to Illegal Alien.
So before we start talking about the track, I have a question for Simon.
Yes.
So can you explain to us what it was like to live in England in 1983 with that mass immigration of Mexicans
Yes,
that
precisely.
were coming
right,
over the
yeah.
border into the UK
I
at
think-
the time that inspired Phil to write this?
I think, in all honesty, sort of like this is a lot of people say sort of it's borderline racist, but I'll be really honest with you. It's not borderline racist. It's just flat out naive. I think that's what it really comes down to.
I think so, yeah.
And I think it just comes down to the fact that I know that it was done as a joke. I know that there was a lot of humour involved in it. People maybe weren't necessarily as knowledgeable about things like this back in those days. I don't know. I can't speak for those guys. All I know is it's an incredibly catchy number.
Oh god,
Yeah,
it's a fantastic song. It's just, I was just joking around
Yeah.
about the subject. I'm
Right.
like, there's an English band singing about
Yeah.
Mexicans crossing the border, and I was
Right.
like, okay. I mean,
I think this is one of those lyrics that, for the most part, looking at it, if you just read these lyrics, you're like, this is actually a pretty good song, a pretty good set of lyrics. But I think the way that they're sung
he does the. Let's call it an accent.
turns it into a comedy number that's not quite, especially in this time frame.
It wasn't pleasant to be part of the comedy.
Right. So I think that it's like if you look, imagine with different music, this lyrics, I got a cousin and she's got a friend who thought that her aunt knew a man who could help. At his apartment, I knocked on the door. He wouldn't come out until he got paid.
Dun dun dun.
I mean, again, imagine if these lyrics were done in a Peter Gabriel-esque style.
Interesting, yeah.
People would think,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, this is such a telling look at immigration in
A
the
sort of
United
family
States in the
snapshot
1920s."
kind of sort of thing.
Right. It's all in how it's done. And because it's done in this arrangement with, hey, we're having a good time, it turns into, again, down the road, this is kind of rough. But at the same point, like you said, catchy, listening to it this week, I found myself singing it to myself again because it is a good song with questionable lyrics that make me cringe, but also that I kind of hum along to and have a little bit of a good time.
If you can, ignore the lyrics and Phil's vocal stylings, we'll call it, in this track, musically, it's a great bit of songwriting. The arrangement's fantastic.
Mike's bass.
Everything.
There's a lot of cool stuff.
And I'll tell you,
going on in
if you don't believe me, what changed my mind about the song was listening to the Genesis Archive 2 version. It was a live version from the LA Forum in 1984. It just kicks ass. Mike's bass in this is fantastic. His guitar work is great. Yeah, so it's great.
Of all the Genesis songs that you say, well, I'd like to be a fly on the wall while they're running that one. This is one you wouldn't think you'd want to be there, but I want to be there to where the decision was to say, all right, Phil, you're going to sing this in a broken Mexican Spanish accent, and people are going to love it.
Again, it comes down to the fact that sort of times change, and then you look back, and I mean, you only have to look at sort of like the Benny Hill, and even sort of like looking at some Monty Python stuff. It's racist, and but you just think to yourself, you look back and go, what were you thinking? Of course, they weren't.
time.
It was the time in which it was done.
So, being from South America, at the time, did you?
No, I mean, I don't think we paid a lot of attention to the lyrics or the video was again fun and quirky and all that. I remember when I bought the cassette, like the radio would play the song instead of from the it would go straight to the song. So I didn't know it had those few seconds of sounds. So when I got the cassette and I go to the B side, I started to listen and I was like, oh, I think the cassette is faulty because this sounds. So I went to the record store with the cassette and said, oh, I think this cassette is faulty because on the B side, on the song, and the guy looks at me and says, well, that's how the song goes. I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I was still getting to know the band. I was totally clueless for the most part. So, but yeah.
Now, Ellie also has a book, which has the language. It's a book of translations of Genesis lyrics into Spanish. So Illegal Alien is one of these translations, which is just kind of amusing that this song that is not exactly the most
No, but it didn't have any connotations of,
Sure.
I mean, for us was fun song,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they must have finished it at like 4:50 on a Friday afternoon, and Hugh Padgham was just like, fuck it, that's good.
It'll never be a single.
Yeah, no one's gonna listen to this.
All right. So, Taking It All Too Hard.
No, not this confused again. No, not the same mistakes again. You're taking it all too hard. You're taking it all too hard.
Best set of lyrics on the album.
I would agree with that.
I think it's actually, to me, the feel of this song. Again, not that it feels like old Genesis, but it just has this feel of, this melancholy, and I use the word wistfulness a lot just in my common daily life, but I think that it has this feel to it that works for me, and I think the lyrics here tell a very simple story of emotion, which Genesis hadn't done in the past necessarily all the time.
Right.
And I think this was, again, another entry into that world of we can talk about emotion in these songs without it necessarily having to be couched in giant hotweeds.
It strikes me as a kind of like a Rutherford Collins kind of feel, because it's got that taking it all too hard, throwing it all away, that same kind of
I was like In Too Deep. It reminded me.
Yeah,
of
it was
that.
kind of like that kind
A
of
better version of
Yeah.
In Too Deep.
We'll get to that conversation later.
Right.
For me, I tend to abhor mawkishness
Okay.
in a track, and I just think this track is laden with it. And and here's my big but.
it's a nice big but.
Yeah,
It's okay.
exactly. The thing that really hit home to me this time round was it's a much more coherent song than I remembered it being,
Right.
and it almost reminded me in places of Many Too Many.
Sure, I can see that. Well, because it's piano driven.
Of course.
And
My theory is
the thing that the only thing that really brings this song down for me, because for a long time I didn't like this song. I thought it was too mawkish, too kind of sentimental, and didn't really have what it needed. Is that I think the chorus, which it actually starts out with, just doesn't do much for me. It has great verses, and the chorus kind of lets me down.
Yeah.
And I think that if the chorus had been, I don't know if the lyrics were different, or if the music would have been slightly different for it, if that would have made it work better for me.
That line in the verse, "Old days have gone, but they're better left alone." Just that melody line,
that line where it's a little chord change. Or
oh my god, that's the
something.
most, for me, that's the most beautiful
Yeah.
bit on the album, the entire album. It's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It tickles my ovaries. I like it.
To get back into the lady balls.
Yeah,
here.
you know, I don't know. When I was a little girl, I was like, oh, it's such a pretty song, but it is a sad song. It's very melancholy and
A lot of Genesis lyrics, especially in the 80s, I think people can take them on the surface in one way.
right.
And then when you look at them a bit deeper, like a song like Invisible Touch, it sounds like a happy song, and all of a sudden you're like, oh no, it's not.
No.
and I think this is one of those songs that, kind of, to me on the surface, it sounds kind of that weepy, mawkishness type of thing, but when you really look at it, you're like, there's some real feeling here. For me, and again, your mileage may vary with that.
No, for me it's the same thing. Sometimes I like it, and I think it's wonderful, a great song, the lyrics as well. And sometimes I'm like, let's skip it and go to the next song.
Yeah.
Just a Job to Do.
It's no use saying that it's alright. It's alright. But where were you after midnight? Midnight.
This is my favorite track on the entire album.
Excellent.
When I get an album, my favorite songs change all the time. So maybe a song that was my favorite, 5 weeks ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is now different. But for some reason on this album, I've always loved Just a Job to Do. It sounds so 80s, which I love. So awesome. I love the bass line, the guitar, the chorus is great. Again, another like great Rutherford moment on the album. Phil doing the iconic 80s scream vocal.
Bang, bang, bang.
Down you go. Oh, I love it. I could listen to this all day, twice on Sunday.
I think that this song actually has an awful lot of similarity with a track on an album that was come after, which is Anything She Does.
Sure, okay.
And I get that there's the same kind of lilt, the same kind of sonic quality to
it's
it.
the fast song on the album, yeah.
Well, I'm going to piss off my friend Rob, who doesn't believe that horns and Genesis mix at all. They should stay on Phil Collins albums. But as much as I love the song, I think it would be better if horns were used on this song. Tony uses this faux horns. If there were real horns at that point, and all throughout it at different points, this song would be like taken to the next level that it is right now. Like if you listen to the song, and there are certain parts that come up, they're like, okay, horns could go there, horns could go there,
Oh, sure.
and the song would just like come alive.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Because the little it's okay, but like when you think those could be real horns,
Yeah.
you're like,
Something
oh, that's such a
bigger.
cop out. But I think at this point they're
And
like
horns in the background of the verse, like, I
Yeah.
got a name.
even building up.
Kind of going through the background there.
It would be
not
so
like
great.
in your face.
It'd make it
Right,
less
no.
80s sounding,
Yeah.
though.
less really with horns like that.
I don't know. Maybe you need a sad saxophone. Maybe.
Not saxophone, but something else.
I think after Phil probably might have suggested that, but I don't think Tony or Mike would have been up for it because they figured
After the
they
last
did it.
album.
Phil's done it on both his solo albums.
Yeah.
We're done with the horns. We've done
It
that.
sounds too
But
much like Phil
Yeah.
Collins now.
Yeah.
At this point, it's so
It's-
associated
yeah.
with him that they
Although
were
this
like,
song certainly doesn't sound like a Phil Collins song.
no,
either,
no,
so that's-
but it's just the
yeah.
horns. I
Maybe
think.
that's why they didn't
Right.
do it. That's my other
Perhaps the
theory.
way forward would have been bagpipes.
Right,
Could've done
exactly. I think that I love this song. I think the middle eight, the kind of piano
Piano part. There you go.
I think that lets it down a little bit because to me it's too much of a break from the rest of the song. You've kind of been going at this pace, and then you're getting still into a fast-paced part of the
Right.
song, but it breaks it too much from the verse chorus. And again, we're talking about a progressive band. We should be okay with that. But I think in
Right.
the context of this type of song, it's like hitting a break to me.
Right.
So I like it. I think it's a great song. I don't know if it's my favorite on the album. Actually, I
Right.
do know it's not my favorite on the album. This second side of this album, Genesis, does not get a lot of love necessarily.
Yeah.
From the band or even from fans. And I think that it's easy to overlook that there are some really good songs on here. I think sometimes Illegal Alien and Taking It All Too Hard kind of make people go, oh, see, side 2 is not that great. When it really is a solid side of an album.
I'd like to ask actually to the rest of you guys and possibly to the listeners.
Hi, Mom.
Out there, which is, I think this is the first album that Tony Banks employed samplers on.
Yeah, I would think so.
I believe so.
Yeah.
I think it is. I remember that documentary that was on the 5.1 box. I think they talked about that was the what was, I can't remember now what
The
they were.
Synclavier? Something
It was
like that.
either
Or Prophet
Synclavier.
or
The only two samplers that were really any good at that point was
Right.
the Fairlight and the Synclavier.
Fairlight. Yeah, okay.
I think it was, and he used that in "It's Gonna Get Better."
Right.
That's like the big
That was the
moment
reverse
with the
of something
reverse
there,
thing.
yeah.
So
Silver Rainbow.
Rivers flow blue turns into gray. Winter follows springtime. Morning is the day. Beyond the silver rainbow.
No.
Yes.
Okay, so we're getting a yes from Simon, a yes from Ellie, a no from Stacy.
Big yes from Tom.
I would say big yes from me, but I think it's too one note throughout the entire song. I love the drive of it.
Asterisk, I do
Yes.
with mine, yes.
Yeah. I love the drive of it. I think it's fantastic. I think the lyrics are fun. Although I think that they could have been a little smoother in some spots.
See, I'm not entirely sure a bear should walk into the room at that point.
I don't think that's ever a good idea. Whenever I hear the song, I imagine Phil like looking at the lyrics and rolling his eyes while he's trying to sing through this. I mean,
But is there not more a quintessential Tony Banks song than
Right.
Silver Rainbow?
well, it's no excuse, but yeah, I love the verse. I like the drum and guitar driving, like you were saying, that real driving beat. But when you get to the chorus, it just takes the piss out of the entire song. It sounds like, I don't know, like
To me, it sounds very. It sounds
It's
very
like-
Beatles-ish, kind of Strawberry Fields,
Yeah,
Lucy in the Skies.
or-
To me, it sounds like a riff piece of music that they had that they knew was strong.
yeah.
And they were like, we got to find something to do with this. And just, they came up with this arrangement and this lyrics and said, all right, we're going to go with it. And there's enough there that I'm like, yeah, I like it. I just wish it went somewhere.
They could have
I
done
think-
so much more than verse, chorus, end. Like
Right.
that was it. They could have expanded it in at least some direction, had another minute somewhere where they traveled in a different direction, but you're like, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah,
okay,
it
good
needs
chorus.
to develop somewhere.
Yeah, just
and it
doesn't
just
go
doesn't.
anywhere.
This actually brings me round to another question I was going to ask you guys, which is because the lack of additional material, I'm not entirely sure we're pre-Live Aid, post Phil Collins' second album. Is that right? Am I?
Pre-Live Aid, post
Pre-Live Aid, but post-second album, yes.
I don't know if it was an active or just an implied agreement that they would turn up and just write together as a group.
I think it was a pretty active decision that they said, after doing Abacab, where they had the area where they can write together, and they each had the one solo song, and the writing together was working again. They said, okay, well, if we're having these solo careers that are, at that point, different levels of success, but, Phil was getting successful, keep Genesis for being Genesis. The three of them doing things together.
And they've said that on Abacab, their favorite tracks were the ones they wrote together. So that's
Right.
really what helped them
This brings,
decide.
the reason why I make mention of this is that I know obviously there was a vetting process. Obviously, all three of them had to say this is a go, and I'm addressing the point that Tom said about the first verse, chorus, first verse, chorus. I totally agree that I think that maybe this song could be developed, but I came to the table post 1970s, like all of the rest of us, and I think it just comes down to the fact that this song, out of all of the tracks on the album, reminds me most of the 70s Genesis, just for, through the land that lies beyond the silver rainbow.
Right.
And the moment that Mike Rutherford runs his finger from low note up to octave, that was as close as I was going to get on this album to the 70s.
Right. And even the through the land that lies, it's like on Broadway. It's like it's the melody there just is so signaling to me that it's hearkening back to that.
Yeah.
That it feels, you're right. I think that does feel like a bit of a throwback, and I think, like, I wish that there had just been a bit more put into that track.
I totally
that
agree
would
with
have,
you.
not made it a copy of the 70s or anything, but just made it more of a modern version of what it is, and more of a complete version of it, because it's great, but it just doesn't have enough to it.
Yeah, I agree. But I also, if I remember correctly, it's one of the songs which I think Tony Banks was quite proud of
He wrote the
writing.
lyrics
Right,
to, yeah. And I think there was something that I saw in an interview, I read somewhere, that Phil wanted Mike and Tony to each sing one song on the album.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
You're talking smack.
No, Phil.
What you talking about, Willis?
Because Phil wanted, again, I think, to kind of give them some exposure as vocalists, and I think that Tony would have sung Silver Rainbow, and Mike probably would have done Taking It All Too Hard, songs that I think that they each wrote the lyrics for. But I think both Tony and Mike were like, no. This is you're the singer in this band.
It's a bit
so.
hard, sort of like, I know it sounds terrible because both of them are incredible songwriters in their own right. And it's very magnanimous of Phil to sort of say that,
Right.
because he does want the band to be a band.
Right.
But he's Phil Collins.
Right.
How relieved was he when they said no?
Well, because that's also the thing about, bands have certainly had multiple singers. The Beatles, go back to that, and it certainly worked. But Genesis was not really known for that. Even when Gabriel was singing, Phil would sing a song here and there. More Fool Me, For Absent Friends, co-lead vocals on certain things, but even then it wasn't like Phil was singing every other song. It was, that was, Peter was the vocalist, then Phil was the vocalist. And, but I can picture Tony singing Silver Rainbow very easily in my head.
See, I always associate this album with the first 3 tracks and never with the last side.
Well, that's the thing. The first side, again, That's All notwithstanding, is very strong. You got Mama, That's All, and the Home by the Sea, Second Home by the Sea. Very strong set of music. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the second side, which, again, if Illegal Alien doesn't do it for you, you're probably gonna kind of tune out for the rest of the time.
It's kind of a weak B-side. It's not weak, it's great, but...
And those tracks weren't played live either, except for Illegal Alien and It's Gonna Get Better. It just wasn't... Those songs, I'm amazed that Just a Job to Do was not played live.
Right.
When we saw Daryl Sturmer play with his Genesis, tribute band, he didn't open with Just a Job. Did he open with Just a Job to Do?
I don't
If it wasn't opening, he played it very early in the set.
Really?
And it was like, yeah, this song works live.
Did he add horns?
He did not add horns. Still was a keyboard sound. But it's... Tony talked about this in Chapter and Verse, that there were songs that, for whatever reason, both from the 70s and the 80s, that they just never played live, and that maybe they should have. I wonder, I don't even know if they rehearsed up these songs and then decided not to play them. So I'd be curious to know a bit more about that.
Well, when you consider that they played basically everything from side 1, and... Was it 2 tracks from side 2?
Correct. The Illegal Alien and It's Gonna Get Better.
Yeah. So, that's over half the album.
Right. They did a good shot with that. But, yeah, it would have been nice to mix it up a bit.
But I said that you could imagine Mike singing.
I think Mike would have been... No, Tony would have sung Silver Rainbow.
So they played that live. Imagine Tony singing live.
Yeah, sure.
Can you see that?
No, I don't want to imagine that. I never want to imagine that.
Tony Banks, if you're listening, I like your voice. I would have enjoyed hearing you singing that. But, all right. Moving on to It's Gonna Get Better.
Track as far as I'm concerned. I have an awful lot of time, and the reason why I have a lot of time for this is it was just that bass line is just amazing.
Boom, boom. Yeah, it's great.
And I think it's one of these ones where the bass line is in odd time but the drums aren't. Almost the exact opposite in some ways of Keep It Dark.
Right. In
the fact that the drums have a very strange accent, whereas the guitar's just sort of a lot rock solid.
Right.
And I thought that was a really clever thing to do, and it's got a great lilt to it, and it's got a really good lyric, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it has that cool kind of opening with the keyboards, reverse sounding sample, whatever it is, some orchestral thing, I think Tony has said. It's a song that tells a story, not a real detailed story in any way, but you really feel like there's real emotion in there, and there's real, stakes being talked about here. So,
and the lyrics, as you say, there's some hope, and I think in any other melody that these lyrics were put to, reach out, hands in the air, it could be seen as cheesy and schmaltzy, but the way that it was mixed together with the music they did, with that weird kind of keyboard intro, then you have that bass line starting, and then that sustained chord that kind of builds louder and louder to the reach out. It's not schmaltzy, it's not cheesy. Kind of gives you, it's like a hope song.
Right.
Because at the end it's going to get better.
Yeah.
And
it starts with a feeling.
It starts with a feeling. And it's one of, I think, as a three-piece, is probably one of their best songs.
And I think, have you guys heard the longer version of this with the extra verse in there?
It's the 12-inch release of Mama.
Yes.
Both Mama and It's Gonna Get Better have extra verses, aren't they?
Mama is stretched out a bit more at the end, I think.
Oh, is it
I don't
really?
think there's
Okay.
a verse in there.
It's been a
more
while
just
since
a
I've
bit
listened to it,
It's
yeah.
a bit longer towards the end. More of Phil screaming. Which is good. It's fine. But I think I could see why they cut that down a little bit. It's not going to get better unless there was an issue with the timing of LP sides. You know, it's too bad they cut out the extra verse.
Yeah, I don't know why they played it live in the real version.
Right.
I think they just, in case of the LP side timing, they just had to use the shorter version and cut out a verse, which is a shame because it makes a good song even better.
Yeah, I think it's a great song. I think this is the best example of the electric and the acoustic drums blending together on the track in the entire album. Like, it's very seamless. I love it. It's a gives it a good like feel and a groove.
Do you think it's a good ending to the album?
Oh yeah,
fantastic
definitely.
ending.
I do. Unfortunately, this song was played constantly in the supermarket where I used to shop when I lived in New Jersey. And so it's kind of, I always call it the supermarket song. It's going to get better. You're going to go down to the candy aisle. And yeah, so it's kind of a little bittersweet for me in a personal way. But yeah, it's a great track. As Tom said, it's a great showcase of all three of them and really showing their strengths. Vocals, bass, the arrangement, the drums, everything.
It just reaches a pinnacle at the very end when it starts with a feeling. That whole area with the piano.
There's piano?
There's piano at this part. It's time for a change. Like that build up and like the light show that they did at this particular point in the song. It's just like it builds up and you ride the wave and it kind of ends out. And
one of our listeners, John H., wrote in talking a bit about Genesis in general, but talked about that the last two tracks on this album are very underrated. Side one plus these two, Silver Rainbow and this one, all great material. That the other three let the album down. So that's an opinion, not uncommon, I think, amongst Genesis fans, that the side one is strong, side two not as strong.
But I think Mike Rutherford refers to this as his favourite Genesis album.
The first side, at least, I know he talks about the second side also not being as strong. So I'm not sure. Probably every couple of years they come up with a different. They each kind of talk about different albums being their favorite at different times. Tony's fairly consistent, but I think that Mike and maybe Phil, changes around depending upon where they're at with things.
Well, it's normal. My favorite album changes all the
Exactly.
time.
Well, the other thing I was going to say with regards to the dearth, if you will, of material on this album is that there was one spare track, or at least a snippet of a spare track, which apparently was something I think Mike Rutherford brought to the table, which eventually became Call to Arms on the first Mike and Mechanics album.
My understanding is that was actually from the Abacab sessions.
Oh, really? That was from the
that's
Abacab
because
sessions.
that was talked about on. Again, I'll nerd out here. When I taped off the radio, Phil and Tony on Rockline in October of 1986, that I taped off the radio, somebody talked about, hey, how did you guys get writing credit on this? And they both thought it was a snippet left over from Abacab.
Right.
Now, whether it was from Abacab or this album, again, I've never seen another specific reference to exactly where it was from, but they both at the time thought it was from Abacab, and they actually joked that I think Phil, I think that it Mike called Tony, and Phil was like, "Oh, Mike didn't call me about it," and he's like, "I would have told him I was using it." So that's just kind of the joking around about things with that. So I think we've come to the end of the album. So we're going to do Tom's big poll now.
Tom shows you his poll.
I know you guys have been waiting all episode to see my poll or hear about my poll. And my poll has been waiting anxiously.
Should we
we'll
say
go
what
around
our
and say what our
favorites?
favorites were?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or did we say that already?
Let's
Let's
go around the
recap.
table.
Okay,
recap.
we'll recap. All right, well, mine's just a job to do.
Home by the Sea, second Home by the Sea.
Mine's Second Home by the Sea.
It's gonna get better.
The Home by the Sea, Second Home by the Sea. And I'd have to say that you all agreed with most of us here at the tabletop. And it was kind of split. Second Home by the Sea got the most votes. I think some people who voted for the first Home by the Sea were kind of thinking it as one song.
Sure.
So that got the most votes. After that, it was a three-way tie between Mama, Silver Rainbow, and It's Gonna Get Better.
Really?
There you go.
That's an interesting...
Then, after that, it was a three-way tie between That's All, Taking It All Too Hard, and Just a Job to Do. And coming in last place with 0 votes. Coming in last place with 0 votes was Illegal Alien.
That's only Italian.
No, that was Italian.
That's a fantastic.
Hey, there's probably illegal Italian aliens.
That's a great Japanese
I was
accent.
Should we all end this episode doing our horrible accents we want to do? No.
There's this one
I
thing.
wanted to make an effort.
Can I just make mention of just that
Sure.
this is a out of all of the albums they've done, I think this is a particularly dark album.
Yes.
Sure. But go on.
The reason why I make mention of this is that it's a very stark album. You look at the packaging, and although it's like it's yellows, but it's black and yellow,
Right.
and it always, I don't know why, but this album feels to my ears. Whereas Abacab was a very wet, reverberating album. This is, even with tracks like Mama, this is quite a dry, claustrophobic album to my ears.
Sure. I agree. You mentioned the album cover. Can we all agree that this is the worst album cover of
Thank
Genesis?
you. I was just about to say that.
I don't know if it's
I like it.
I don't know if it's the worst. Yeah, I don't know if it's the worst. I think
Sorry.
they have worse ones.
I think it's worse ones as well.
It's up there. There was a game in the 80s that I had as a kid called Perfection.
Yes, it was Perfection.
Perfection. All the pieces were different colored shape, yellow colored shapes. Trapezoid, rhombuses. There were zombies in there, stars, circles, trapezoids, whatever.
Leprechauns.
And you had to put them in the puzzle piece before it popped up all over the place.
Right.
And this looks like
Yes,
after
those
you
are-
lost, these were the puzzle pieces.
Right.
That game scared the shit out of me when I was a kid.
Because
That got
these
your heart
covers
rate
are really
going.
artistic,
Yeah.
but this one is
And
kind of
I get the
not.
black and yellow kind of very stark
Yes.
and dark, but it just seems like someone was grasping for straws at this point. And says,
I don't like the cursive logo.
My kid, the cursive logo, just didn't work for me.
Well, I think, just thinking about the album as a whole, I think this is one of their best musically, but worst lyrically. As a whole, Genesis, I don't think, compared to other bands that I listen to and like, they have the best lyrics ever anyway.
I don't know if I'd agree with you when it comes to like Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea. I
No,
think that's a good
Home
lyric.
by
I
the
like those lyrics, even Tony's lyrics on that.
Okay,
I like.
I mean,
No, I think there's certainly...
not-
I see what
he
Stacey's
sings
saying.
"Sit Down" for like 8 times in a row. So
taken.
I just
The guy's not sitting down.
I know. Yeah, lyrically, I think this is one of the weakest lyrics. But musically, like I said, the fact that they all came together with nothing written and they produced this,
Right.
that really speaks to the talent that they have. And and like I said, this album's so close to my heart. I never get tired of it.
And I think, I will say, the remix from 2007, I think, thickened out the sound a little bit more.
Yes, that was something else I wanted to say, because when I had this cassette, and then previous CD, I got the cassette, and then I got a CD player,
Right.
and then even the remasters from the late 90s,
Yeah.
I had to turn it all the way up just to hear it.
Right.
This album, I don't know if it was mixed in doubly or whatever. It was you could not hear it. But it wasn't until the 5.1 I was
Right.
like, okay, here it is.
Right.
And
This
yeah,
is
it's
how I
just
want to listen
really,
to the sound. It fills
really
it out
great.
more. Yeah. It
Yeah.
gave it more of a field, stereo field for me, and broadened out the sound and made it sound a little less tinny and
Exactly.
a little less
Yeah.
claustrophobic, which,
Right.
Simon was saying before, that maybe that's kind of what it was going for, this very
Mm-hmm.
dry sound, which it didn't make it as dry, but it didn't change the character of the album either. I thought, again, 5.1 mix did exactly what it was supposed to do for these things. So thumbs up to Nick Davis for doing
Yeah,
those.
definitely.
Maybe you guys got a different copy, but it's still the one album, even on the remixes, that I have to turn up louder than every other remix that I have when I play it.
It's still
It's very kind of low.
Yeah.
Where
It's
I put
better.
everything else at a 10, I got to put this up to a 13 or 14 just to have it at the same level. So
Cool. Well, thanks again for listening, everybody. It's been fantastic to talk about Genesis, Mama, Shapes with you all.
The piano album.
The piano album, as Tom calls it. We will be back again with whatever album we decide to talk about next. You can find us on Twitter at Genesis Tabletop. You can find us on Facebook under Tabletop Genesis. You can find us on the web at tabletopgenesis.com. And you can write an old-fashioned email to us at genesistabletop@gmail.com. And so we're all over the place. Who knows? We may have Instagram by the time you next find us. You can even find us on Tinder, maybe. So if you want to date the whole group, you'll know where to find us. So we'll be back next time with more detailed commentary on some Genesis album. And have a great time. Enjoy the rest of your day, week, month, year. Thank you very much.